Let's break it down. Bangladesh just held its first truly competitive national election in years, and one force shaped the outcome more than any party machine, a generation that grew up believing elections didn't matter, and then suddenly proved they do. Gen Z didn't just show up to vote, they set the terms of the campaign. They forced the agenda onto jobs, governance, and basic dignity. And in the end, they helped deliver a sweeping win for the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, not because Gen Z became BNP, but because Gen Z became the kingmaker. If you want to understand the next era of politics in South Asia, this is the pattern to watch. I'm Imran, a Middle East-based analyst. And today we're going to unpack what happened, how youth power translated into electoral power, why BNP benefited, what it means for the region and the world, and the risks that come with this new chapter. First, the setup. Bangladesh is a country of roughly 175 million people, and it sits at the center of major global interests. It's one of the world's biggest garment exporters. It's strategically positioned between India and the Bay of Bengal, and it's been a key arena where China, India, and Western partners all compete for influence. But politically, for years, a lot of young Bangladeshis felt elections were either predictable or pointless. Then came the rupture, a student-led uprising in 2024 that toppled the longtime government and opened the door for a new vote under an interim administration. That's why this election matters. It wasn't just who wins. It was the first real test of whether a protest generation can turn street energy into institutions. Now, what happened? The BNP won enough seats to form the next government, and as counting solidified, the scale looked more like a commanding mandate than a narrow victory. At the same time, Jamaat-e-Islami and its allies performed strongly enough to be a serious opposition force. And importantly, the previous dominant party did not contest this election. It was barred after its registration was suspended. So the contest became a battle between established opposition blocs, with a smaller protest-born youth party struggling to convert activism into a nationwide electoral machine. So where does Gen Z fit in? This is the key. Gen Z didn't elect a youth party. Gen Z used its weight to reshape the incentives for everyone. Depending on how you define the cohort, young voters were either about a quarter of the electorate or an even larger youth and young adult bloc reaching into the mid-30s. Either way, it's massive. And these voters weren't unified by ideology. They were unified by lived experience, unemployment pressure, frustration with corruption and extortion, and a strong demand for freedom to speak and organize without fear. That combination changes politics. It means slogans don't work, dynasty doesn't work, and trust us doesn't work. So how did that translate into a BNP win? 3 mechanisms. 1. Gen Z made governance the winning message. When you have millions of first-time or first meaningful-time voters, they don't vote based on all-party loyalties. They vote based on whether they believe life can improve, jobs, prices, safety, fairness. Reporting from the ground shows young voters repeatedly returning to the same themes: work opportunities, rule of law, and basic rights. BNP positioned itself as the most viable vehicle to remove the old order and restore normal political competition. And viability matters when voters want change but don't want chaos. 2. The youth movement split, and BNP captured the pragmatic change lane. A protest-born youth party existed, but it didn't scale fast enough into an election-winning organization across constituencies. Some of that energy fragmented and some aligned into other blocs. In that environment, BNP didn't need to own Gen Z. It needed to win enough of Gen Z plus older voters by offering a credible path to stability and economic relief. 3. Turnout became the weapon. This election saw substantially stronger turnout than the previous cycle, and youth participation was widely expected to be decisive. When young voters show up in large numbers after years of disengagement, they don't just add votes, they change margins, especially in competitive seats. That's how a party can move from likely winner to landslide. Now, what does it mean for the world, and why does this feel like a new era? First, supply chains and economic confidence. Bangladesh is central to global apparel manufacturing. Months of disruption hit the economy hard, and global buyers pay attention to stability. A decisive election outcome can reduce uncertainty, but only if the next government can restore security, keep ports and factories running, and avoid prolonged street confrontation. Second, the geopolitics of the Bay of Bengal. This election will shape how Bangladesh balances India and China. Bangladesh wants investment, infrastructure, and market access, and it will likely keep pragmatic ties with both. The big change is that a competitive political system gives Dhaka more legitimacy and bargaining power internationally. Countries negotiate differently when their leaders can say, "We have a mandate." Third, the global Gen Z playbook is evolving. We're now watching protest generations learn a hard truth. Overthrowing a government is one skill, building institutions is a different one. Bangladesh is becoming a live test of whether Gen Z-driven reform demands can be translated into durable rules, term limits, judicial independence, accountability, instead of just changing the faces at the top. Now, the risks. A youth-driven political opening can close fast if expectations crash into reality. If the new government can't deliver jobs, reduce corruption, and protect freedoms, the same generation that created the opening can also destabilize it. And if the opposition landscape becomes more polarized, especially with a strengthened Islamist bloc, issues like minority protections, civil liberties, and social cohesion will come under sharper scrutiny. So what should you watch next? Watch the first 100 days, appointments, law and order posture, and whether anti-corruption efforts target real networks or just political enemies. Watch economic signals, job programs, currency stability, export performance, and whether the government reassures investors without selling out domestic reform demands. Watch the constitutional reform agenda. If institutional guardrails actually move from referendum talk to implementation, that's the clearest new era signal. And watch Gen Z itself. Does it stay organized as a civic force pushing transparency, or does it fragment into personality politics? Here's the takeaway. Gen Z didn't just help choose a winner. Gen Z changed the rules of the game, forcing a competition that many believed Bangladesh had lost. BNP won because it convinced enough voters, including a critical slice of young people, that it could deliver change without collapse. The new era isn't one party is back. The new era is a youth-heavy society has discovered its leverage, and it expects results. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, subscribe, and share it. And tell me in the comments, do you think Gen Z movements can successfully build institutions after a revolution, or do they get pulled back into the old political patterns?